then Matt, by the time your presentation is ready to go, I think we'll have a critical mass, and we'll be recording this as well. So let's, so that we have this, that we can share more widely following the call. So welcome everyone, I'm Joanna Ashworth. I'm one of the 30 research partners that is involved in this network of Participedia from around the world. I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm also the co-chair of Participedia's Teaching, Training and Mentoring Committee. And that's an exciting group that is looking at the potential of Participedia both as a teaching tool and a way of engaging learners by preparing and contributing to the cases that are on Participedia. And then just before we get started, I want to first of all welcome you and encourage you to introduce yourself. At the bottom of the screen there's a chat function where you can say a little bit about where you're coming from and your interests, and then that way when it's time for the presenters to share their presentations, they get a sense of who else is on the call, which I think is also always very helpful. So if you wouldn't mind, just use that chat function. We'll be able to see who's joining. Right now, I think we'll see a couple more people are joining us. So welcome. So again, my name is Joanna Ashworth. I'll be moderating, and I just want to set this up by giving you a really brief overview of Participedia. And it's, for those of you who don't know about this research project, it's a global community sharing knowledge and stories about public participation. It's as the two kind of founders of the project, political scientists Arkon Fung from Harvard and Mark Warren from UBC, they talk about it as an open funnel, and which relies both on a series of partners, research partners from around the world, but also crowdsourcing. And you'll see when we get to the slide on that shows the Participedia website that there is a place to submit cases. So we've been receiving cases from all sorts of projects and courses, and we're going to be hearing from our presentations today about how one particular course is actually using Participedia as a place to develop cases and to learn how to prepare those cases in really interesting ways. So really the goal of Participedia as this global research project is to document and record cases, but have these cases then be data for those who work in public participation, whether government or in communities, to try to seep into and influence the practice of public participation for the good. As I said, there are 31 research partners from diverse organizations from around the world contributing to the cases. And you can see this website is Participedia XYZ, or Z for those of you in the States. And this is our beta research website right now, but I think it's a vast upgrade from the one that we originally started with. So it's exciting to see just visually how easy and intuitive it is to get around the site. So in terms of the research itself, Participedia has one core question, which is what kinds of participatory democratic innovations work best for specific purposes and under what conditions? Clearly that's a complex question that in order to answer it, we're looking at the cases that are submitted on Participedia and currently analyzing them according to a set of variables. I won't get into that right now, but I'll just say quickly that the project goals are to map democratic innovations, to try to explain how and why these participation processes work and under what conditions, and to assess their contributions and transfer knowledge into practice and develop a model of collaboration in social science. So there, if you're interested in looking at some of the latest research, there is an article in the Journal of Public Deliberation, the 2017. So if you want to move to the next slide, Scott, that'd be great. It's not listed here, but under project goals, this is where I'm at right now. in the Journal of Public Participation, Volume 13, Issue 2, John Gastill and others have written an interesting research report on some of the findings to date based on data driven from Participedia. So I'm just going to flip forward, and now I want to take a moment to introduce our presenters. All of this information on the slides, where you can source Participedia and other databases that we're working with called Dataverse, and other research links are available on the slides, and you're welcome to take a look at those later. But I want to get to the main feature, which is our two presenters today, Matt Leighninger and Julian Landry. And I just want to take a moment, first of all, to thank them for taking the time to be with us today. I think both of you are, travel extensively and often on the road. So I think we're getting Matt from a telephone booth somewhere in the Midwest. So really appreciate you being with us today. And Julian, I think, is back in Nova Scotia and hopefully not covered with a blanket of snow yet. So let me introduce Matt first to you. Matt Leighninger is the Vice President for Public Engagement and the Director of the Yankelovich Center at Public Agenda. And he has, for the last 20 years, worked with public engagement efforts in over 100 communities, 40 states, and 4 Canadian provinces. So he does have a Canadian connection here too. During much of that time, Matt has served as Executive Director of the Deliberative Democracy Consortium, which is an alliance of major organizations and leading scholars working in the field of deliberation and public participation. And he's also led a working group that produced a really interesting tool called Text, Talk, and Act, and that combined online and face-to-face participation. And it was part of President Obama's National Dialogue on Mental Health. And he has been a contributor in the development of Participedia. As well, he's known for an excellent book. I use it in my teaching. It's called The Next Form of Democracy, a first-hand account of the wave of democratic innovations from the 90s to the 2000s. And his most recent book, Public Participation for the 21st Century, co-authored by Tina Navachi, who has also been on our webinar series, is a really excellent and very current text that I think people teaching in this field are using extensively. Matt has a master's in public administration from Columbia. He's also a senior associate with Everyday Democracy and a research collaborator with Participedia. And then I'll just introduce Julian Landry because his presentation will come on the heels of Matt's. And we're really happy to have Julian Landry. He's also part of the teaching, training, and mentoring committee of Participedia. He's a senior staff, program staff person at Cody International Institute, which is part of, it's located within the Xavier University in Nova Scotia. And Matt brings 15 years of experience at the intersection of citizen participation, community development, adult education, and both in Canada and internationally. He's worked in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And as part of his role in advancing Cody's thematic work in the area of accountable democracies, Julian designs and facilitates educational programs for community development practitioners from around the world, focused on citizen engagement, advocacy, social accountability, good governance, and accountable democracy. And he also leads Cody's knowledge building efforts in participatory governance as part of the Participedia project. So we're really thrilled that he is such an engaged research collaborator with Participedia. And Julian has a master's degree in community and regional planning from the University of British Columbia. So welcome to Matt and Julian, and welcome to all of you who are on the call. And I hope you will take a moment to introduce yourselves on the call. And once the presentations have been completed, then we'll take questions. And I just want to remind Scott, who is managing the slides, that we'd like to record this session. So I'm not sure if it's recording or not, but let's remember to do that. And then, so I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and I'll ask the person behind the screen, Scott Fletcher, to pass the mic over to Matt Leighninger. So thank you, Matt, for being here.
Thank you, Joanna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you.
I just muted myself, so.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And I apologize. There seems to be some background noise coming from my mic, which I can't hear here. But anyway, I apologize for that. Thank you so much. And thank you to Scott and everyone, Jesse, Pat, for organizing this. I just want to say a little bit about how I use Participedia and kind of the kind of overarching purpose that I think Participedia serves. And a lot of this relates to the fact that public participation is such a diffuse, varied concept. I mean, all over the world, as you can tell from Julian's resume and mine, and the people on the webinar here, people are doing engagement in all these different contexts and all these different places and all these different issues, and they're doing that work from many different kinds of organizations, government or nonprofits or community organizers or so on. So it's an extremely diffuse field, and people come to it with all these various different definitions of what they mean by public participation and different terms that they use. In fact, I generally use engagement, which I don't define that any differently than I define participation, and other people use other words like involvement or other things like that. There's a whole bunch of synonyms for the same set of work, and so people have a lot of trouble, I think, kind of defining what they mean by it and saying why they're doing what they're doing and kind of relating to one another. So Participedia is terrific in the sense that it kind of gathers all this work, all these real stories in one place, and it's a great kind of a resource for helping people figure out what they're doing, to see some of the implications, some of the different kinds of ways they could do things differently, and so on. Good. Okay. So when I talk about participation or engagement, generally, I'm talking about when I'm doing this kind of workshops, trainings with usually the people I'm working with are kind of mid-career professionals who are trying to do engagement in their work as in planning departments or as community organizers, so on. And so when I talk about engagement with them, I kind of give them this very broad definition, which is the one that Tina Nabati and I use for our book, which includes all these different kinds of activities, circulating information, gathering input from people, discussing and connecting, providing choices for people, giving people chances to deliberate on big decisions in their communities, in their countries, and then volunteering and public work. So various ways people are kind of contributing their own time and energy to solving public problems. But another way of kind of saying this, another way of saying this is that engagement is about kind of two dimensions. It's about the relationship between citizens and the institutions they serve, and that's certainly very important. And some people come to this with just that in mind. That is their main focus, often because they're working for an institution and they're trying to kind of establish better relationships with citizens. But then there's the other, there we go. And there's the other kind of dimension of engagement, which is about the relationships among different groups of people and the kind of the strength of the social networks, the social capital in those networks. And that's really important because a lot of the kind of impacts of engagement or participation that we see actually seem to have to do with these kind of social networking, social kind of capital sorts of outcomes. In addition to whatever outcomes you might see from people and institutions working together differently. I often will tell a story of how I kind of got a bigger picture of what was happening with engagement. Because I started out my career kind of working with the small picture. How do you facilitate meetings? How do you kind of recruit people to show up for something? How do you kind of frame issues? And it wasn't until about halfway through my career so far that I kind of got a sense of this bigger picture. And what happened was I was in this town called Lakewood, which is a suburb of Denver. And the reason I was there is that in Lakewood, the residents of the city said it was a great place to live. They valued the schools. They thought the parks were great. They, the great quality of life, everything's wonderful. And so it was a city they enjoyed living in. And yet the city budget had gone pretty seriously into the red because 9 times in the previous 30 years, people had voted down sales tax increases meant to maintain the same level of services. And the mayor's called this meeting, all these different neighborhood community leaders, and he's saying, well, what do you want me to do? I can try to raise taxes again. People aren't going to like that. I can cut services. They don't like it when I do that. What do you want me to do? finally somebody says, you know, Mayor, we like you, we think you do a good job, but what we have had here is a parent-child relationship between government and citizens, and what we need to create is an adult-adult relationship. And that was a nice image for me, and it's an image that I've used countless times since then, because I think it describes what we're facing in all these different communities in which people are trying to make participation work. We're facing this kind of generational shift in what people can contribute and what people can expect from their communities. And I began to realize that you know, in many cases, people are busier than ever. They don't have time to engage in much of anything. And yet when they do find something that they can engage in, they bring more resources, they bring more skills to the table. That in many ways, people are feeling more entitled to the protection and services of the institutions in their lives, and yet they have less confidence that those institutions are going to be able to deliver. And then in many cases, people have, even though we have all these new ways of kind of getting information about things, in many ways, people seem less aware of what's happening in their neighborhood or the school that their kids attend. So essentially, you know, we're in a situation where people are better able to contribute to governance and are less willing to be governed than ever before. And that has an impact. That seems to be happening all over the world. It has an impact on everybody, no matter what kinds of organizations you're working in. There we go. So to kind of classify the different types of engagement, you've got kind of, you know, top-down kind of conventional sorts of engagement, typical public hearing, the typical public meeting. You know, these are kind of methods of engagement which embody this kind of parent-child kind of dynamic. Then you've got thick forms of engagement, which are more about empowering small groups. And then you've got thin forms of engagement, which are more about empowering individuals. And both thick and thin have emerged in the last 20 years or so, or they have proliferated in the last 20 years or so, partly because of the limitations of conventional engagement that's, you know, so common in our systems. Engagement can also happen in invited spaces, and I'm using here kind of a typology that Andrea Cornwall and other people who have studied participation in the Global South have developed. So they talk about how engagement can happen in invited spaces. So an institution is trying to get people to the table. The image you see here, the one with the long table, looks like a pretty conventional sort of, you know, participation. It's the kind of parent-child dynamic. You've got the parents there behind the table. You've got the children kind of interspersed in the audience. The other one on the other side with the people with the easels and everything looks much more participatory and interactive and fun, probably more productive as well. But either way, this is an engagement which is happening in a kind of an invited space. It's on the terms of the institution. But we also know that, there we go. Engagement can happen in invented spaces. And so here's a couple very different sorts of images. And you see, you know, on one of these, you see kind of a mass protest or mass demonstration. And then on the other side, you see a kind of a small group of people who are talking about things. And of course, you know, these are things where the institution hasn't initiated it. And sometimes the institution really isn't involved at all, except to react. But people have this capacity to create their own engagement. And part of the kind of the challenge I think that we face all around the world is figuring out how do we take some of the strengths of both the invited types of spaces and the invented types of spaces so that we get this much larger array of people involved in things on their terms, but it also has direct connections to policy change, the resources, to kind of the standard ways in which public decisions are made. And there's some kind of different sorts of examples where you know people are trying to combine the invented and invited spaces. That, you know, the top two are situations where, you know, physically the participation is happening, you know, where the issue is or where the people are. You know, I love this alley better if there were these, you know, qualities to it. People right down as they're walking by. That's in Salt Lake City. The one on the left, the other side with the map there is from Toronto. So it's getting people to kind of talk about kind of where they live, what kinds of services they want, what they value, what they don't. The one with the kind of people holding up their smartphones kind of is a you know, an image which conveys the fact that we can use these, the technologies we have are much more versatile than they used to be, in the sense that you can be, you know, you in participating in all kinds of places and using your smartphone in ways that kind of have both the kind of the power and directness of face-to-face, thick sorts of small group engagement, and also the power of the technology to kind of make people feel like they're contributing to a national conversation. And that's the essence of Text, Talk, and Act, Joanna, which you described at the beginning, is it's combining both of those sorts of things. And then meeting in a box is another fairly basic way to kind of go where people are, give them kind of kits of materials that they can use wherever they're already going to be meeting or gathering, to kind of give weigh in on the different issues, decisions that are happening in their lives. So essentially, I mean, the really innovative, powerful forms of engagement I think that we see around the world are instances where people are treating each other like adults. You know, whether they're working for institutions or they're public officials or whether they're citizens, residents of those communities, that there's an adult-adult relationship that you see in the way that they're interacting. People are getting the information that they want in the ways that they can use it. They're getting chances to tell their story and kind of link their personal experiences to the issue. That's always, or often, the most important step, is getting people to kind of talk about why they care. Then giving people choices, giving people a chance to deliberate, to look at different options on the table, what are the pros and cons of each, and give their opinions about that. You're giving them a sense of legitimacy, that their voices actually matter, that they count when it comes to decisions that they, or kind of causes that they care about in the community. You're giving them chances to take action, to kind of devote their own time and skills and talents to some of the things that they care about, to some of the ideas that they're cooking up with one another. You're giving them a good process, and you're giving them kind of food and fun. Those are also really important, especially when you're trying to kind of bring people back to the table again and again. So engagement, has, in the temporary forms that we've seen, it has certain strengths for people, in terms of making policy decisions, developing plans, budgets, those kinds of things. It has strengths in terms of, its track record as far as catalyzing volunteerism, citizen action. And certainly we can see from a lot of the evaluations that when people participate in these more kind of adult-adult sorts of environments, that trust is rebuilt, the new leaders have a chance to step forward. We see a lot of those kinds of impacts. But we also see some of the limitations of kind of those occasional temporary sorts of kind of invited space kinds of engagement. Basically, they're a lot of work, often for temporary gain. They're inefficient in the sense that they're rarely collaborative. You have different organizations that are only kind of reaching out to people on the basis of their own issues and decisions and not working together. And that also, even in a very successful kind of process, you often can go back to the community a year later, and it seems as though kind of everything has moved back to kind of politics as usual, that they're making decisions and tackling problems in the same old kind of not very participatory sorts of ways. So when I'm talking with professionals who work in engagement, and one thing that I'm using Participedia to do is to kind of illustrate all these different sorts of issues kind of examples and ways for people to engage, and kind of trying to get them to think about systems. How can they not just do a kind of a good process or a temporary, occasional kind of engagement effort, but how do they also kind of think through the kind of system for engagement in their community? How do they think through the various laws, processes, institutions, other groupings that give people regular opportunities to connect with each other, to solve problems, to make decisions, and be part of the community? And if you break that down a little bit further, and this is a chart that Tina and I used for our book, you can kind of break that down into the different sorts of things you want to have happening if the system is going to be robust. You have to have information being circulated. You have to have input and data being gathered and sent along by citizens. You need people discussing and connecting in various regular sorts of ways. You need decisions. Ways for people to make decisions that are on the small scale for their families or their neighborhoods, and also the big scale that are larger decisions facing their communities or even their countries. And then finally, you need ways for people to be supported and inspired to do public work together so that they are actually contributing their own efforts to problem solving. So if you think about this in a kind of a more architectural sense, and I think that's partly what we need to be doing, is thinking about, in our various places, what kinds of activities, what kinds of supports, what kinds of metrics, do we need that will kind of be part of the system that will allow people this wide range of ways to engage, to support each other's engagement, to have this stronger relationship both between citizens and their institutions and also between different groups of citizens. I think that's it for me, and on to Julian.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. Lots to think about, and some really interesting concepts. I think thick and thin democracy, and then just thinking about where, in terms of systems that in which all of our process work is embedded. So really looking forward to some questions following the presentations. Oh, and then here's some information. These slides will go out to people. So if people want to reach out to you, here's all your information. So that's great. So Julian, now over to you. I think you're going to be getting control of the device. And so we'll look forward to hearing how you're, in terms of the theme of this session, what works, coaching and mentoring professionals in uses and research of public participation. That's our theme. And clearly Matt has focused on, what works with when doing this work as professionals. And I think we'll be looking forward to hearing about what's working in terms of training and teaching and using Participedia in that context. So looking forward to your talk.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt, for the setup, and Joanna and the team at Participedia for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a little bit about our work. What I'll be talking about, I think, will complement Matt's presentation and the work he's presented, but it will focus a bit more on coming at it from an educational angle. Being that we are primarily an educational institution here at the Cody Institute. So I'll talk about how we use Participedia to promote the ongoing learning of public participation practitioners beyond the classroom. And in order to do that, I'll spend a bit of time talking about what we do inside the classroom as well, if my slides cooperate. So we'll start with talking about what we do here at the Institute, and just talking about the approach that we use in the classroom and how that connects to the type of work that our participants, our learners, the adults that we work with, to use Matt's terminology, are doing outside the classroom in their context all over the world as they seek to build engagement into the work that they're doing, which is fairly diverse work. I'll talk about how Participedia supports that work that they do back at home, the process that we use here to support them in doing that, and some of the results that we're starting to see, and then offer just a few thoughts on what we are learning about what the practitioners learn in their context, and some lessons that we're learning here in terms of doing this work around education. So the Cody Institute is an educational institution that is housed on the campus of St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia, in a small town called Leighninger. The Cody Institute has been around for 60 years as a training center for practitioners, for adult learners who come from all over the world to learn about community development leadership from a citizen-led, community-driven, asset-based perspective. So the idea here is that, building on a long history here in the region of cooperative movements and citizens organizing by themselves and for themselves to secure the resources that they didn't have, building on that history of the Antigonish movement, the Cody Institute has been the sort of international arm of a philosophy of development and of working with communities and for communities for a long time. So the world comes to the Cody Institute and is here for short-term programs, 2 to 3 week programs, but also longer-term programs like the cohort that you see in the picture, who are here for a 5-month program. So we bring development leaders from around the world, and the idea is to enhance their ability to drive citizen-led development back home. Education is our main activity. I like the language that Matt was using. We use an educational approach, an adult education approach. So we try to treat learners like adults. So we try to create in the classroom the kinds of relationships and the kinds of dynamics that we'd like to see in society, and that they can experience in a small space what they want to take home and build into their work. Beyond what we do in the classroom, we also try to develop a knowledge base around this kind of work. So working with our graduates and with partners to do research and build knowledge around these types of approaches and tools. And we can't do this work alone, so we work in partnerships, kind of as a standard. And our partnerships are extend all over the world. There's 3 particular groups that we target, all of which are practitioners, but we have programs targeted to youth, targeted to women, and others for Indigenous participants and Indigenous groups. And there's 3 sort of thematic areas that substantively our work focuses on. So when we talk about development, what sub areas can we talk about? So there's programming around the economies, around resilience and community development. And what we're talking about here, and where Participedia kind of fits in, is the area within which I work, which is the promoting accountable democracies thematic area of our work, which deals with issues of governance and advocacy, and that relationship between citizens and public power. So the approach here at Coady, we're quite mindful about developing learning programs that build reflective practice for the learners who come. So in order to do that, we start with the experience of the learners, the practitioners who come from all over the world and come to share experiences. So their experiences is actually the subject of the collective analysis that we do in our classrooms. So they are at the center of our approach. They are mostly from the global south, mid to senior level practitioners. They tend to have a minimum of 3 to 5 years of experience related to the courses that we're teaching. But in terms of their age and so on, we have people who are 20 years old, we have people who are 65 years old and have had a long career in engagement and governance and so on. Practitioners that take our programs are mostly from civil societies, but they also, we have people from government and from different sectors, and people who work on a variety of different issues. They come working on various kind of public service delivery issues, human rights issues, advocacy, accountability, etc. Of course, they come with many questions and many expectations. So the kinds of things that they're hungry for when they come to our learning programs, as practitioners, they're looking for new tools and approaches. They're looking to exchange ideas with each other. They're looking to learn new practices that they can apply back home to strengthen their own work and to have greater impact on the ground. So these are the kinds of things that they would identify on the first day, as you see in the picture of coming into the program with. So these participants who are at the foundation of what we do, they come to our education programs. The programs that we offer here, look at approaches to build engagement in the governance systems that practitioners operate within around the issues that they're dealing with, strengthening democracy, deepening democracy, if you will. We have programs on citizen-led or social accountability, programs on advocacy, on peace building, and so on and so forth. So a diverse set of programs that people are interested in. In the picture, you see a Ugandan activist doing a stakeholder analysis to improve the accountability of primary healthcare in her country. So this is the kind of big picture analysis that participants are doing, thinking about their work and how to make it more participatory and more accountable. In terms of our methodology in our programming, again, back to not treating adults like children. The adult learning methodology that we use is really predicated upon creating equal relationships between the learner and facilitator. We talk about facilitation more than teaching, really, because we recognize that the knowledge and skills of all involved are worthy of analysis and of sharing. We don't try to just focus on the knowledge and skills of practitioners, but also the attitudes and sometimes shifting certain mindsets that they may have in. And the facilitative approach that we use is often effective for that. So you see in the picture, for example, an Ethiopian environmental activist sharing with a governance consultant from Nigeria on giving each other advice about the kinds of challenges they think they might face in building accountability into their respective work. The whole reason why we offer these programs is, again, to equip practitioners to lead effective change, but also to enable them to plan and to practice the learnings in a kind of learning setting so that they can feel more confident in applying that when they go back home, and ultimately promoting more citizen-led and participatory approaches in their work. So this is the picture here is a part of a course that we've done in Tanzania around social accountability, where participants are facilitating a community scorecard exercise with children from a local school to give them a chance to practice, to learn from that practice, and then to apply it back home if they choose to. So we use Participedia in this program setting, in the classroom setting, in a number of ways. We've found that it's a very useful tool to explore different possibilities. That you know, sometimes this is the kind of work that in many different contexts that our participants come from is quite challenging. And so it's useful for them just to be exposed to a number of examples that have worked and understand the challenges that exist in different contexts and so on, so they can reflect on how that might apply to their context and give them new ideas of how they can build engagement into their work. So we use it as a resource for self-directed research. It's also a repository of options for them to consider as participants. So that's the kind of stuff that we do in the classroom, but we recognize that learning doesn't end when they go home. In fact, it's an ongoing process. So whereas in the classroom we focus on learning for reflective practice, we try to get them to reflect on their practice and to build that into their learning. We also want them to learn in their practice once they go back to their contexts. And we want to support the learning that happens in reflective practice. As they are in their work, perhaps applying some of the new approaches that they've learned in this cycle of action and reflection, there's a lot of learning that happens on the ground that is also an important part of the learning process. And so the kind of key question here is, how does Participedia support this ongoing learning? This is the question that we asked ourselves when we joined the partnership, is how can we use this tool to support the ongoing learning of practitioners when they're back home? And so the way that Participedia works with the development and documentation of case studies is that it provides a structured framework to guide the reflections that practitioners have on their work. And also it provides some resources in terms of supports that I can provide from a distance, as well as an editor that we've hired here at the Coady to do this. So we've seen that the process of documenting their work actually enhances and their learning, enhances their reflection on their work, and promotes that ongoing learning that we're interested in seeing. So who are we talking about that is doing this work with Participedia once they've returned from Coady programs? The pins on the map represent participants who have graduated and come back to reflect on their work and write up case studies from all over the world. It's not all of our graduates. We have a selection process whereby we're working with about 22 different graduates from about 12 to 15 countries doing this kind of work with Participedia. And that, they're very different kind of work. It can be some people working with advocacy approaches for women's representation in local governance in Ghana, for example, other using social accountability approaches in Egypt to improve education and getting schools built, for example. So what's the process? How do we actually make this happen? As I mentioned, we first start with a call for applications. We invite people to, we send this to a number of our graduates who are doing promising work and good work in the field of participation and governance, and invite them to submit just an idea of what it is that they could document as a case study. once we have a cohort selected on an annual basis, we do an orientation webinar where for them to meet and to share what they're doing and to make sure they're clear on the process. And then it basically consists of rounds of feedback and coaching and editing between ourselves here at the Coady and them back home at a distance as they're writing up their experiences. And in some cases, it can take up to a year and to have 12 or 15 different versions of the same document before we land on a final submission for Participedia. And the key piece for us in terms of understanding the learning is a follow-up questionnaire that we've developed to tap into what difference did it make. You've documented your work. Did that have any impact on you as a learner and as a practitioner? So the output, aside from the case studies that you can find on the Participedia website, if you just do a search for Coady, they'll come up. We are also linking this with our own innovation. It seems like my slides are not moving anymore. Let me just. So we're linking this with our own publications and our own work in knowledge building. We've been able to bring some of those practitioners here on campus as fellows so that beyond just documenting their work, they're also developing tools so they can share their work to other constituencies. So here are the 3 fellows from Uganda, Nepal, and Nigeria doing a webinar for our Coady networks and partners on their work. And we've participated also in learning events in places like the University of Toronto with other practitioners and students of public participation. We've learned that what works is having a clear framework, offering timely support, working at the pace of each individual practitioner, because this is work that is a bit difficult to do when you're knee-deep in your practice, and providing that ongoing communication with each individual. There are challenges around time management and maintaining the focus while you're working remotely. We've certainly seen some practitioners, kind of getting caught up in the day-to-day and not taking a bit longer than they hoped. English language, of course, this is an international group that we're working with. And we found that the peer communication that we've been able to set up as part of the fellowships, when we're working online, it's really difficult to create those peer connections between different practitioners writing up their case studies. So I'll move towards closing here just by talking about the so what. So what did we learn? So in those surveys, we found that really what practitioners report back after documenting and reflecting on their practice is that it consolidates a lot of the learning that happens in the classroom at the beginning. So all respondents, 11 out of 11 practitioners who have documented their cases agree that they learned something about in the classroom that helped them play the role they played in the case that they documented. In terms of learning in practice, they also agree that there's lots of learning that happens through the process, that it contributed to their ability to reflect on the practice and to document it in a case study. The exercise of documenting, of producing the case studies for these practitioners also contributes to their knowledge, skills, and attitudes, which we try to build in our learning programs. What the graph shows is that where the greatest impact is around the skills and to some extent the attitudes, right? So it's not so much about learning new knowledge. There is some new knowledge gained through this experience around, collecting more information about the work that they're doing and so on. But it's really around the skills regarding, kind of storytelling, effective writing to different audiences, but also articulating complex ideas. So the kinds of skills that are transferable into different realms as practitioners that become important. And in terms of attitudes, the importance of reflection, to rethinking the role that they played as a result of this, increases in confidence and analytical abilities. And of course, with attitudinal changes and increased in confidence, we're more likely to see that transfer into new actions and new behaviors beyond even what's been documented here. So what this, we clearly, Participedia has been effective in supporting at different touch points in this cycle, the ongoing learning of those who document their work. But what we've been recently able to do is not stop there, and to use what's been documented to strengthen the educational programs for future cohorts of learners. So for example, this year in a Promoting Accountable Democracies class, we were able to bring in the fellows from last year's Participedia fellowship back into the classroom and to share directly in dialogue with the learners from this year. And that enables learners to pose the kinds of questions that are on their mind and ask someone who's had some similar experience grappling with that in the field. So, we had one of the fellows works with citizen observers to combat corruption and enhance accountability in the judicial sector in Nigeria, and she was able to provide advice to a Zimbabwean participant, a youth activist, on how to navigate risk when you're dealing with these powerful institutions in these more risky contexts. Similarly, an organizer who's building a movement for political voice for persons living with cerebral palsy in Uganda was able to offer advice to a Zambian participant working to build human rights into her work with persons with disabilities and so on. So it's encouraging for us to see this loop kind of closing, and Participedia being used in new ways to enhance the learning of more practitioners. Just a few concluding thoughts, that because learning is an ongoing process, there is really that complementarity between what is learned inside the classroom and beyond the classroom. We've certainly seen that. We've seen that as participants document their own experiences, it deepens their learning on a number of different levels, and Participedia is an effective structured tool to do this. That being said, practitioners need different supports at different times. So for some, it's more in terms of the writing and organizing ideas. For others, it's even understanding their own experiences as a case that is worthwhile of documentation in terms of participation or political participation or governance. There are some challenges, of course, working at a distance and virtually. There are limitations there, but in general, it's been effective. And that being said, what we've found, of course, when we can bring people together to document in the same room, in the same physical space, there's a peer-focused element that really enhances the experience and deepens the learning through the documentation process. I think I will leave it to that for now and pass it back over to Joanna.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks to both. And I recognize there's a lot to talk about, and we just have a short time. And I see that we do have a question from Stephen Buckley, who has a very interesting handle at Transpartisan. I'm not sure where Stephen's located, but his question is around what is the best and most engaging way for someone to participate in the Participedia community. And then his example is around this idea of discussing stories about, for example, referees in the game of public engagement. So, and by that he means, I think citizen observer could be a referee, or someone who is holding the conveners accountable. It's an interesting question. Not sure if either Matt or Julian would like to comment on that. Matt, maybe we...
I can take a stab at it. If I understand, the first part of the question is around the best way. So from our perspective, I think for practitioners who are doing this kind of work, and they're simultaneous, they're learning and documenting a practice that is ongoing, really it's added a level of depth when we've been able to work with practitioners outside of that sort of rat race of their daily practice, in the forms of the fellowship, whereby they come to Coady for a month and do the work as a smaller group, and assisting each other in doing that. That being said, for us, what's been effective in terms of engaging people in Participedia has been just having maybe a simplified set of tools and systems to bridge between their realities, their level of English, for example, language skills, and so on, their constraints on their time, and what Participedia is looking for. So we've had to design our own sets of questionnaires and templates that they can follow. And then the third element, of course, being just ongoing support and being clear with them that if there's any question, they can reach out to us at any point. I'll leave it there. If Matt wants to add anything on that point.
Would you like to weigh in there, Matt?
Well, so I mean, I think the question kind of brings up a couple of things. One is the importance of entities in a community that have some responsibility for supporting engagement overall, right? So instead of what we have now, which is all these different organizations, agencies, organizers, civil society, government, all these different groups kind of doing engagement kind of on their own terms, no single person kind of responsible for kind of supporting it collectively, or to kind of inspire and manage any kind of system for engagement. So therefore, it's hard to know. I mean, when someone, in terms of calling a foul or whatever, nobody's there to do that. So one thing that most places I think need is some type of body, and it could be a commission, it could be a volunteer group, it could be, there's different ways of doing it, and I've kind of seen different communities kind of play with different possibilities. But some kind of set of people whose job it is to kind of to track how engagement is working across these different kinds of spaces and different actors, to kind of set some definition, to kind of help people define how engagement should be working in their community, and then to measure it and to kind of help people kind of have good expectations from one another about what engagement is supposed to do and what they can expect. So that kind of group, I think that maybe speaks to kind of Stephen's question of somebody who can kind of play that sort of role. The other thing is kind of the metrics themselves, so that we don't measure this sort of work well, or in many cases at all. And so, and it's hard therefore to know, or kind of on what grounds one could call a foul. Is it, I don't know, people were invited to participate, or people didn't like the opportunity they had to engage, or some other reason. And so the one thing that we need in lots of places are more of those kinds of measurement tools and shared kind of metrics for that will then, and by the way, of course, whenever you're trying to measure something, it forces you to define what it is. So that's kind of a good thing in its own right. But it's a way for people to kind of both clarify what they want to see happen, and then see kind of collectively whether it's happening or not, and kind of hold people's feet to the fire in some cases, in the way that Steve is suggesting, when that's not happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. And I think in all the dialogue work that I've done over the years, we always would sit back and try to even ask ourselves, was this really, did we accomplish what we set out to do, which was really dialogue, or have the process that we intended to have, and what were the barriers? It's often very hard to see those in your own work, but having others who are these kind of participant observers to think critically about what you're doing, I think, how we learn how to do better. There's a great question here from Chen, and let's start with Matt. Can you talk more about the ways to have participation in the systemic and architectural level? You show that really complex image, which I think is really telling. Maybe some examples that you like, and what your book details. Now you've got like 30 seconds to do that.
Okay, so it's a, yeah. the architectural kind of example may seem overly detailed and daunting, so I can understand that. The kind of examples that I've seen of sustained engagement are often very simple at heart. I mean, what you see happening in most places is people coming together on a very regular basis, often around a meal. And I use examples like Buckhannon, West Virginia, or On the Table in Chicago, to kind of show kind of very regular sorts of participation which are centered on citizens. I also talk about Hun, which is a town in Spain, which uses Twitter as kind of the backbone for their engagement in all kinds of ways. So anyway, so yes, there are examples in the book. If you look at slideshare.net, you'll find many presentations from me that include slides on some of these places. And if you look at the Public Agenda website, I've also written about a lot of them in blog posts there.
That's great. Thanks for that. There are lots to talk about in that regard. And then, Julian, if you have any online resources, and I think maybe you have a link in your slides, but if there's other kind of learning resources, Chen was interested in that question. Maybe you could throw up a link or.
Yeah, there's lots of learning resources that we have on our website. There's under the education section in our, I mean, I can send those links to as a follow-up that maybe we can send with the slides. But we have some publications that we've put out. There's a publication coming out this month around this work that we're doing with Participedia, and it has all the case studies that we've produced so far, that our participants have produced. There's also for each of the courses that I've mentioned, and every course that we offer, we have a kind of curated list of resources that complement the things we do in the classroom. So there's lots there, and I can send some links so that it's easier to share that way.
That's great. Okay, well, on that last question, I think we're going to wrap up. But thank you all for being here, and particular thanks to Matt Leighninger and Julian Landry for taking the time to put together such really interesting and complementary presentations. I think that we do have a better sense of what, if we can talk about what works in terms of coaching and mentoring, whether it's within the classroom setting where we're in a training situation, or we're just practicing good practice and being very mindful and being very intentional and being able to share the sort of mental models that we bring, and doing that within the context of our practice. And I think, Matt, that the work that you're doing in that regard is really helpful to those of us who are both working in the field and also reflecting on it in a more scholarly way. But thanks to both of you for being part of this.
Thank you.
And so we have another session planned for the fourth session, but it is evolving, and we don't have our date confirmed yet. It'll be sometime in early December, but it will be with Archon Fung from Harvard and co-founder of Participedia, as well as Mark Warren from UBC, and they've agreed to talk about where we are in Participedia, the vision, the research to date, and where it's going as we've hit the midterm mark of this 5-year project. So we're looking forward to having you back, those of you that took the time to be with us this morning, and to invite others to our next session. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted. Please also consider this quick submit function on the site. As Julian pointed out, it's a lot of work to post these cases, but keep in mind that this is a crowdsourcing sort of open form of editing. And Scott Fletcher, who's behind the scenes today, is one of our researchers that is often editing and updating and keeping those posts and those cases current. And sometimes people will submit a stub, and there's other work to be done, but we welcome any and all of your observations on work that you're doing or that you're familiar with. And that is sort of the beauty of this project, that it allows all of us to be contributors and participants. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we look forward to hearing back from you, and also sending you the materials from today very soon. Okay, goodbye now.
Thanks all.
Thank you.